Hi, my name is Jennifer Howard, and in today's session, we're going to talk about how to tell the difference between Enneagram Type 2 and Enneagram Type 7. If you read the title and you're anything at all like me, you may intuitively think right off of the bat, why do we have to have a video on what's so different about Enneagram Type 2 and Enneagram Type 7? Because those two types are pretty distinct and pretty separate from each other. They're very much polar opposites in a lot of ways. I have been thinking about doing this video probably since September. It's at the end of December now, and I'm making it because if I were going to be completely honest, I've always easily confused Enneagram Type 2 and Enneagram Type 7 when I'm witnessing it in other people. That's a common mistype even for me. And I had to think about it for a little while because it just didn't make much sense, because when I'm reading all of the profiles for Enneagram 2 and Enneagram 7 in my mind, they seem so very different. And so I wasn't understanding how come on paper I understood the differences, but then in real life, when I went to apply what I was learning, I was having a really hard time separating those two. Okay, they're very different. So I decided to get on the internet and Google around and get into some blogs and some different threads on Personality Cafe and things like that, and just start asking people and looking around and reading and seeing if there were any other people that were confusing Type 2 and Type 7. And as it turns out, it appears that it's a fairly common mistype on the Enneagram, which blows my mind. Because again, just from an intuitive perspective, when you're reading the profiles, it seems like this should be pretty cut and dry, but apparently it's not. So I have been thinking for many months on why this mistype is so frequent. Why is it occurring? What is it about 2 and 7 that looks so freaking similar that some of us are having a hard time telling it apart when we're experiencing it in real life, okay? And then what are some ways that they're very distinctly different that could help us separate those? Okay, so that's what this video has been born from today for you. So I'm going to start like I start all of my videos on discussing the differences between each type and answer the question, why are these types similar, first of all? Why are we getting them confused? And after I thought about this for a little while and I started observing and looking specifically for that, this is what I noticed. You may have different observations, and if you do, please feel free to share them in the comments because I love that. But my observations were that 2s and 7s are both kind of doing that thing where they love variety and they love lots of distraction, and they're packing their schedule really full. They're double booking time slots and things of that nature. And when you hear things like that, if you're like me, you're probably thinking more about Enneagram Type 7, because when we read a basic Enneagram Type 7 introductory profile, we learn about how they are uncomfortable with boredom and stillness and looking inwards, so they're always looking on the outside to keep themselves distracted. So they're usually very extroverted. They love to be on the go all of the time. They arrive late, they're leaving early, their schedules are always full. Sometimes they will promise to be 2 places at once so that if one of those ideas falls through, then they have another plan that they can, back up on, and that kind of a thing. So when we talk about things like that, I think it's natural for us to just assume that that's a Type 7 thing, but I'm seeing that a lot with Enneagram Type 2, okay? So then I had to start asking myself, if Enneagram Type 2 is doing this, why is Enneagram Type 2 doing this? There are a lot of different reasons that could be happening. So I started to explore some ideas, and I thought, could it be that perhaps the 2s that I've observed who do this, could it be that they have 7 in their tri-type? And while for some of them, the answer to that question is yes, we can't just say that every 2 in the entire world has 7 in their tri-type, and that's why they're doing this. That's not the case. And as a matter of fact, there are many 2s that I know that do this that don't have 7 in their tri-type, okay? There's no connection between 2 and 7 on the Enneagram, especially if you don't have it in your tri-type. These are drastically different people, okay? So if that's not it, then what could it be? So I got to thinking about it, and that's when I noticed that they're both doing the same thing. They're both doing that, oh, I need to make sure that I've got my schedule full, and I've got a problem committing to things, and I'm bouncing around like, a little rubber ball all over the room, and I don't sit in one place too long. They're both doing those things, but here's the difference that I picked up on, and this is very key, okay? 7s are looking for a variety of cognitive stimulation. I use the word cognitive here instead of intellectual because cognitive simply refers to the functions of the brain. Intellectual refers to the higher functions of the brain. And for a 7, they just need to have some sort of cognitive stimulation. It could be intellectual stimulation. It could be something very much in depth, but it could be a Family Guy episode, something that requires 0 brain cells, right? It could be something like that. It could be a laser light show, something that, you're not sitting there thinking about the deep questions of the universe. Why am I here? Blah, blah, blah. But your perceptive brain, your neurology is being engaged, if you will. Does that make sense? That's a 7 thing. And on the outside, I think it looks like that's what 2s might be doing as well, but they're not. 2s are looking for every opportunity to have a relational connection with someone, okay? So I'm going to restate that again in a nutshell. 7s are looking for every opportunity to have a cognitive experience, okay? 2s are looking for every opportunity to have a relational connection, all right? And that's a big difference. But on the outside, immediately what it will look like is this person that's overcommitted themselves to too many things, and so they show up late and they leave early because they want to make sure that they're going to do all of these other things, okay? And for a 7, being able to emotionally connect with someone, sometimes that may be part of it, but that's not the primary reason. That's almost kind of like an extra thing that comes along on the side. They just need to be cognitively distracted, okay? It's not at all an emotional thing for them. It's very much about the avoidance of uncomfortable emotion for them. But 2s are doing this because they're trying to seek out as many opportunities to emotionally stimulate themselves in a positive way as possible. And for a 2, positive emotional stimulation is a connection with another person, okay? So what this tends to look like if you're a 2, and I know many 2s who do this, much to my own frustration, is they will make plans with someone, and then they get wind that on that same day at that same time, somebody else may throw this shindig over here, and it's kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to miss that. I want to be there to be a part of that because I want to see that person. I haven't seen them in a long time, but I just promised this person I was going to hang out with them, and I really do want to hang out with them. I don't want to let them down. I'd like to see them too because they're so much fun, and I really love them. And so it's more of a social thing. It's like this social aspect. How can I have as many connections as possible? Okay, how can I insert myself into the lives of other people as possible? 7s just want to make sure that they're constantly engaged, whether it's socially or not. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to say the same point in as many different ways as I know how, because some people hear it one way and other people are going to hear it a different way. So I want to give it to you in as many different ways as I know how to do that to make it easier for everybody to understand, okay? The next point that I want to bring up is that in this process of constantly collecting opportunities to experience either cognitive stimulation or relational connection, I've also noticed that 2s and 7s are very, very similar in the respect that they prioritize those. And it doesn't appear that they're prioritizing it immediately until another function comes along and the 7 says, oh, I would much rather do that one. And if it's at the same time as this one, I'll just drop this one and then I'll go to this one because this is the one that I think would be most stimulating to me. And again, that's an unconscious thought process. I'm not giving you what they're necessarily thinking consciously in their head. I'm not giving you what they're saying out loud, unless, of course, they're just a very well-developed 7. But very few people are well-developed anymore, unfortunately. But the point is, I'm giving you the unconscious thought process that goes along with that, okay? So 2s are doing the same thing, though. They're prioritizing. And again, you don't realize that right off of the bat until you had a plan, you had a lunch date scheduled with a 2. But then someone else called them and said, hey, I'm free today. Do you want to go hang out and go see this movie with me? The 2 in their head is going to say, who would I rather have an emotional connection with? And the person for whom they desire that emotional connection with the most is the person that gets that time slot. If they're feeling particularly, I don't know, anxious to please, they may try to do both, just like if a 7 is feeling particularly anxious to be stimulated, they may try to do both. And that's where the whole arrive late, leave early thing comes into play. Because when you're a 2 and you have all of these possible emotional experiences and opportunities to relationally connect that have made themselves available to you in your mind, it seems like the best possible thing would be to have a piece of all of it. Let me have as many connections as I can. And when you're a 7 and you've had all of these opportunities to stay mentally engaged in something other than your emptiness and your emotional self, it seems like a good idea to take advantage of as many of those things as possible, okay? And so you start cramming things on your plate, whether you're a 2 or a 7, either way, too much, more than you're capable of actually handling. And so you are decreasing the quality of these experiences because you have substituted them for the quantity of experience. And 2s and 7s are both doing this. 2s are doing it with their relationships. 7s are doing it with pretty much everything else. Okay. And I think that it's for this reason that they look a lot alike. All right. But I just gave you a key difference there too. Are they prioritizing based on relationship, or are they prioritizing based on cognitive stimulation? Okay. Those are 2 key differences, big differences to look for. But they're not, I don't think, readily apparent. You've got to kind of get a pattern of observation for somebody who you think might be a 2 or a 7 over time in order to pull something like that out. Because right off of the bat, they can seem like they could go either way. At least that's been my experience, okay? And this is something that I have found really, really helps me. It's pretty definitive, because once you can pull out whether they're prioritizing based on relationship or stimulation, that right there is just going to separate the apples from the oranges, okay? If that's all that you knew how to do, that's a pretty effective tool for telling 2 from 7. It is, okay? So that's one point that I made, or that I thought of anyway. As I have my notes up here as usual, and I never have time to get through all of them, so I'm kind of just going through and prioritizing in my head which ones I think I might like to do based on where I'm at on time here. Okay, here's another point that I would bring up as a difference between 2 and 7. And I always hate using this as an example because there's almost always somebody that's going to be very offended by this, and it's a difficult thing to say in a way that doesn't sound like I'm picking on somebody. So I'm just going to give you, the disclaimer first to say that this point is not intended to pick on anybody or belittle anybody or make someone sound like they're a bad person, but it is a point that needs to be addressed because it's a reality that exists for these personality types, okay? The point that I want to make is that 2s are very other focused, okay? The focus is on what makes other people happy, because when other people are happy, that's what makes a 2 happy. So they can find their own pleasure, their own self-worth, their own happiness by way of pleasing other people, okay? 7s can't do that. 7s appear much more selfish. And again, a negative word, nobody likes to be called selfish. But you need to understand that 7s are internally focused. They're focused on the self. Even if we were going to consider this from a perspective of Myers-Briggs and just the correlations of Myers-Briggs types with these 2 Enneagram numbers, what you'll find is that Enneagram Type 2 is almost always extroverted feeling dominant or secondary, okay? This means ESFJ, ISFJ, ENFJ, INFJ for Type 2, almost always. And by the way, ENFJ and ESFJ are probably going to be the 2 top simply because they're more extroverted. 2s are very much in tune naturally with what's occurring outside of them. Even if they're introverts, it's still kind of a 2 thing to be aware of the needs that are occurring outside of yourself, right? It's just a way of seeing the world, okay? Every now and again, and it is very rare, you will meet a 2 that has got some introverted feeling. If it's going to be an introverted feeling type with 2s, I've noticed that it's almost always dominant or secondary introverted feeling. You don't find a lot of 2s that are thinking types. I can't think of any that I've ever met off the top of my head. Although, again, it doesn't mean anything. I'm just stating a fact. But Or my observation, I guess I should say, my experience, not necessarily a fact, but I have known, I want to say maybe 2 Enneagram Type 2 people that were introverted feeling. One was an ESFP, the other was an ISFP. Oh, you know what? Popular example on The Big Bang Theory, if you want an Enneagram Type 2, Penny on the Big Bang Theory, she's a 2 with a 3 wing, but she is an ESFP, okay? So she is secondary introverted feeling. And she's actually a really good example because I think most people, if they were to watch The Big Bang Theory and they were going to just assess her off of the bat, it would probably be pretty simple for them to say that Penny is a 7. In fact, I promise you right now, if I Google, Penny from The Big Bang Theory, Enneagram Type, I would probably find more places that list her as Type 7 than Type 2, but that's not correct. She's an Enneagram Type 2 because her motivation isn't 7. Her motivation is to be loved and wanted and accepted and to be needed. She pursues that through the avenue of acting, which is very much an ESFP thing. That's dominant extroverted sensing supported by introverted feeling. So she's pursuing it through the lens that she sees life, which is her Myers-Briggs type, which is ESFP, but it's serving that internal function of being wanted and needed, okay? So she's not running away from any negative feelings. In fact, if you actually watch The Big Bang Theory, especially her character as her character progresses through the different seasons, she's very okay with assessing the loneliness that she feels or the rejection or the things that are really difficult for her to deal with. True, she's almost always doing it with, some kind of alcoholic beverage in her hand, but she's always got her friends there to help her through that, and she's able to walk through those emotions. She's very, very in tune with her emotions. She is not at all a 7. But she's a really good example for this video because she could very easily be confused for a 7, although she is not. And this is another issue where you have to be able to separate Myers-Briggs type from Enneagram type, okay? So another good example that I'll give you, Enneagram Type 7s. I think Enneagram Type 7, when we're talking about correlation with Myers-Briggs type, there tends to be a broader range of Myers-Briggs types that are found with Enneagram Type 7. You can find feeling Type 7s, you can find thinking Type 7s. I will say that 7s are almost always extroverted types. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of a 7 that I've personally known, or even like a fictitious character or a famous person. I can't think of any Enneagram Type 7 that was also an introverted type, at least not one that's coming to my head. So extroversion for Enneagram Type 7 in Myers-Briggs is pretty popular, but I will say another way that 7 and 2 can get really confused is once you start getting Enneagram Type 7s who are extroverted feeling dominant or secondary, that will get really confusing. That person can look almost exactly like a 2. I'm going to give you another example. This is from a Disney movie, Frozen. Anna, in that movie, I have not Googled her to see what people would type her as, but I'm pretty certain most people are probably going to say that she's Enneagram Type 2. She is not, okay? She is Enneagram Type 7, and her Myers-Briggs type is ESFJ. She is almost everywhere typed as ENFJ, and that's not correct either. This poor girl just doesn't have a clue. The fact that she is kind of ditzy and has her head off in the clouds is so incredibly indicative of ESFJ. And I'm not calling ESFJ stupid, but what I'm saying is usually having a dominant intuitive function is what grounds you, because you can see things that are beneath the surface. You can start putting patterns together and see things that other people can't see. And so you tend to have a broader perspective of what currently is, okay? And sensing types are very good at the practical things, the things that have to be done right now. And she's really, really good at that in the movie, but she's not good at seeing her life from an overall patterned perspective, which is what an ENFJ would see. So she's kind of doing the thing where she's getting ready to fall in love and marry this guy that she's only just met, which to an ESFJ would make perfect sense because I just met him and we have all this stuff in common and he's a really great guy and he loves me and I like him and he seems like he likes me and I like making him happy and so we should just do it. We should get married and have fun. ENFJs would look into that and say, yeah, no, to give you a prime example, I don't know how I even got off on this topic. I have a friend that's an ENFJ, and even when we went to go see Frozen together, she was watching it, and there's a scene in the movie where Anna she trips and lands in the boat, and the boat's about to fly off the dock and land in the water. And Hans, you know, the bad guy, his horse kind of holds the boat down so she doesn't go in the water. And Hans goes over there and introduces himself to Anna. And my ENFJ friend leans over to me and goes, yeah, look at that guy right there. He's acting like he's all nice when it's very clear he's going to turn into the villain. Right away, she knew it. Okay. Anna doesn't pick up on that because she's not operating with any introverted intuition. So this is my sidebar. It frustrates me when I see people type her as ENFJ. She is not an ENFJ. She's an ESFJ. She is also a 7 with a 6 wing. So there. But I'm bringing this back to my main point, which is to say that this is another way that 7s can look confusing, like for type 2, is if they are dominant extroverted feelings. So again, I cannot stress enough to you, please understand the purpose of Myers-Briggs and the purpose of Enneagram. Understand that they're measuring two entirely different things, okay? They support each other, but they do not define each other. You have to be able to pick out someone's motivational behavior and someone's just cognitive processes, okay? If you can't separate those two, typing is hard. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm telling you because I've been doing this for, I don't know, what was I, 20 when I started learning Enneagram? 21 maybe. I'm 28 now. I've been doing this for a long time, okay? People pay me to do this, okay? And I still have trouble doing it. So I'm not God. I can't read everybody. So I'm just giving you guys tips and things that I've learned as I've gone along, okay? So anyways, Enneagram Type 2 tends to be focused on other people, except in cases when they are introverted, feeling dominant or secondary, like Penny from Big Bang Theory, who is very much self-focused, which is what makes her appear to be a 7, although she is not. Enneagram Type 7 is very self-focused, unless they are Myers-Briggs, extroverted, feeling dominant or secondary, like Anna, who appears to be a Type 2, although she is not. She is a 7, okay? I also want to say that another way that you can tell if someone is a 2 or a 7 is how they take critical feedback. 2s, unless they're introverted, feeling dominant or secondary, which they very rarely are, 2s will so listen to your feedback. They may not like it and it may make them uncomfortable, but they'll sit and they'll listen and they'll be polite. Even if they disagree with what you're saying, they're probably going to apologize for it and promise to do better. Because again, it's all about compliance and pleasing. Compliance and pleasing. That's a 2 thing. If you tell a 7, if I go to a 7 and I say to the 7, you sometimes seem kind of flaky to me because you promised me that we're going to do this, and then 24 hours before we're supposed to do it, you're canceling on me because you found something better over here that you wanted to go do. If I say that to a 7, almost always they're surprised. They'll think, me flaky? I'm not flaky. You don't know me. You're flaky. These are all the problems that you have with you. I mean, they get really offended. And part of this occurs because when you have spent your entire life running away from the darkest parts of you, running away from your emptiness and the really painful things that you don't know how to handle, the really big questions that you don't know how to answer, when you've spent your life distracting yourself from that, what you're also doing, perhaps without realizing that you're doing it, is you're distracting yourself from your own basic internal psychological functioning. So what ends up happening is 7s, they know themselves really well in the sense that they know what they know what their talents are, they know what they're good at, they know that they're really persuasive, they know that they're popular, they know that they're funny, they know that people really like them. But when I sit down and I say to a 7, you do not have the emotional skills to cope with your mother's death, who you were very close to, you're not dealing with it. They're very offended that I would suggest that. Of course they're dealing with it. They're not stupid. They know that their mother just died. Right. But I didn't say you didn't know that your mother just died. I said you don't know how to emotionally handle it. And you don't even understand that those two things are different things. Okay? 7s are just not self-aware because they've spent so much of their lives trying not to look at the dark part of the self. Guys, you don't get to be selective with how well you know yourself. You don't get to study yourself and ignore the dark parts of you while you just play around with the stuff about yourself that you really like. And this isn't just a 7 thing. Everybody's doing this. Even the 2s are doing this, okay? But the point that I'm trying to drive home is this is one way that you can tell 2 and 7 apart. 2s, again, they're not going to disagree with you. Even if they do in their head, they won't disagree with you out loud unless they're extremely comfortable with you and they know that they can disagree with you without losing your relationship. If they know that, and if they know that they know that they know, then they'll disagree with you. But if there's even 0.01% of their brain that thinks that disagreeing with you may cost them their relationship with you, they're absolutely going to agree. Sure, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. You're right. I don't know how to do this. Okay? So they're a little bit more willing to comply with what you tell them is true about themselves, which is just as unhealthy as the thing that the 7s are doing over here, which is just not even knowing themselves at all because they just can't stand to deal with all of who they are, that whole package. They can't handle it. That's not any better, okay? So a 7, again, when you try to critique a 7 or to say to a 7, you have this problem, it's very, very rare that a 7 is going to say, yeah, you're right, I have that problem. I met a 7 one time that was willing to admit to me that I couldn't believe she said it out loud. I said something about, well, 7s have a really hard time apologizing when they've done something wrong. They have a hard time taking ownership for their part in the problem, and especially if it's a relational problem. And she immediately said, yes, that's true. I absolutely hate saying I'm sorry. It's really uncomfortable for me to just admit that, I have to be accountable for my own behaviors. I don't like that. It's easier for me to just, blame all my relationship problems on everybody else. The fact that she said that out loud blew my mind. Okay. That's not something that often comes from 7s. And 7s, they don't mean poorly, not at all. Most of the 7s that I have met are very well-intentioned people. I mean, everyone has moments in life where their motives are not pure. That's just called being human, okay? So this isn't like an exclusively 7 thing. So please don't hear me say that. But 7s, by and large, I think are very well-intentioned people. In fact, a trend that I have noticed with type 7, and this is another reason that they can get confused for type 2, is I have noticed that 7s, and I don't even know where this comes from, but the 7s that I have known, all of them have been very interested in social issues and social justice and making sure that the right thing is being done by the right people. And they can get really worked up when, laws are passed that they don't think are fair or so forth and so on. I mean, 7s are really big on making sure that everybody gets to be independent and everyone gets to express themselves and that everyone has the right to pursue happiness. And so that's a big thing for them. And I mean, they can get pretty heated over topics like that. They're very defensive of people who have had their rights taken away. Okay. And it's probably because that's a place within the 7 that feels very threatened. You know what I mean? Like that's a big threat for them to take their rights away because they want to exercise their right for happiness. So they don't want that taken from other people either. You know what I mean? We see the world the way that we see ourselves. We assume that if that's the thing that we want, then that's the primary thing that should be focused on for other people too, right? 2s can look a lot like that because 2s are just other oriented. 2s want to make you happy. Whatever makes you happy is what I'm going to do for you. I would say the difference is that 2s think about the happiness of others in terms of a one-on-one situation. 2s are not trying to advocate for a crowd. 2s are trying to please a person. They're trying to please an individual one at a time. And they just keep going until they've got everybody happy. 7s are trying to advocate for the crowd. Does that make sense? And advocating is easier for a 7 because when you're advocating for a large number of people, you don't have to get involved in all of the messy relational issues that come with pleasing someone in an individual basis. You just get to stand up and be a voice for people who you deem as voiceless. And then speak your piece, use your intellectual knowledge, of which 7s will probably have a healthy dose of because they're very well educated and learned people. Most of the time, I've never met a 7 that wasn't much more intelligent than they initially appeared to be. They're much deeper than you think they're going to be. I've never met someone that wasn't like that anyway. So it's easier for a 7, I think, to advocate for people because you don't have to have the relational messiness. You can come in and apply yourself in an intellectual fashion and then move on and do whatever else that you want to do or go fight for the next cause. For a 2, they don't really like advocating for people because there's no opportunity for relational connection there. They need to know very specifically, what do you like? And why are your differences, why are your pleasures and your needs different from this person over here? And how can I meet your needs today? You know what I mean? They need to be able to have that connection. Okay. So there's another difference. Okay. They both appear to be, I think, like they're trying to meet the needs of people, but it's how they're doing it. Are they advocating for the collective, or are they trying to please an individual? Okay. If it's the former, they're a 7. If it's the latter, they're a 2. I am out of time. I had a couple of other points that are really good that we could have gone over, but I'm out of time and I'm not going to do it. So I gave you guys a lot of really good stuff. So, I mean, this is a pretty meaty video, okay? As usual, if you have questions, put them in the comments. If I said something in a way that was not clear to you, please put that in the comments as well, and I will try to restate it perhaps in a new way that's easier for you to hear, because we all communicate differently, okay? Thank you.